Thank you. So we're avoiding extremes. The extremes, the two extremes we're avoiding that he's talking about here are the extreme of theism. Although he says, although you desire salvation, you think it can only be achieved by some greater power that exists outside you. And that's what we begin to reject, if not completely. And non-theism, in which you think that you can achieve salvation by hard work alone, purely by yourself, which is not true. One needs the Sangha, which includes the teacher too, the Buddha. Instead of such extremes, you should join together your effort and energy to try to be awake. So you begin to realize that there's no problem of this and that, no problem of which camp to belong to, you don't have to declare your loyalty to anything in particular, but you're making a commitment to work on yourself with this particular set of tools. He says, finally, you completely flop. And out of that comes the greatest joy. You just relax into this situation. Something happens that is not earthbound. It is there. That is why Buddhist practice is called non-theistic, because you don't rely on any aids. Nobody is going to jolt you except your own mind. It's important when we take the refuge in the Buddha that we are not viewing Buddha as a god. But the Buddha and Yidams and Harukas and Dakinis and the Dharmapalas, all these are not external manifestations. They are purely within us. I remember Trungpa Rinpoche sitting and looking out at us, and he said, the Buddha is an example of a completely ordinary human being who achieved enlightenment. He said he was so ordinary. He said that was his virtue. He was an ordinary human being. And then he looked out at all of us and he said, and you all want to be extraordinary. This was back in the very early days, before we hadn't heard this message. So we see whatever we experience, ideally, without judgment. This is non-theism. There's no good and bad. There's no divine or unholy. It's seeing a blade of grass as it is. You could appreciate your life altogether as it is. And what's necessary for this is devotion and humbleness. Humbleness is the dwelling place of the ancestors, he says. Every one of them began their journey to enlightenment with humility, with humbleness. It allows us to hear and experience the teachings properly, because me, big I, is not getting in the way. Your whole being is completely empty when you're humble, waiting for the teachings to enter you. And there's that an old analogy of the cup and the two kinds of cups that are bad. One kind of cup is cracked, and if you pour something into it, it leaks out. The other kind of cup is dirty, and if you pour something into it, it's actually three kinds of cup. It becomes tainted. And the third kind of cup is upside down, and so you can't pour anything into it. The proper cup is clean, uncracked, and upright in the proper position. So when you pour the teachings into it, it holds them. And that's what we want to be. And that is the analogy for humility, for humbleness. Arrogance makes you impervious, unable to hear the teachings. You're always gloomy. You carry arrogance around like a big growth on your back, he says, pretending it is wisdom and virtue. And I keep thinking, I think I know people like this, who are out there teaching, but with arrogance. With humbleness, you can develop prajna, which is clear seeing, because you don't have any agenda. Joy, because there's no hope and fear. There's just simple humility here, now. And renunciation. Renunciation of what? Of ego aggrandizement. He says it is bringing along less baggage. You are humble and willing to listen. It's not about being subservient. It's not that kind of humility. The Tibetans have an expression, maybe you've seen it, but it's like this. If you want to indicate your devotion, you go up to the object of your devotion, the great teacher, and you go like that. And stick out your tongue and bend your head down like that. This isn't about that, not at all. He says, so it's not about being subservient, it's about being a simple and direct person without any preconceptions due to arrogance or pride. With humbleness, you do not look for the possibility of bringing your arrogance into the Dharma. Instead, you look quite hard for the possibility of bringing yourself into the Dharma. And more as we tread this path, we become committed to the idea of bringing ourselves into the Dharma, realizing it, that this is the only true way to live, to have a real life, a full life. Taking refuge means that you're giving up your own territory, your own arrogance, and becoming altogether stateless and groundless. And I think of Mingyur Rinpoche, who went to India and just walked out one day and went on a walkabout for I don't know how long it was, somebody here might know, a year or two, and he just wandered India. We are educated, processed, trained, beaten down, and punished. We practice so thoroughly that we leave everything behind. All of our stuff, all of our me, all of our pride, which is such a burden, that pride. We all have it, and the path really is about abandoning it and becoming an ordinary and humble person, truly, without any posturing of humility. He says, we practice so thoroughly we leave everything behind, including our fingernails, in order to be accepted into the Buddha Dharma world. Taking refuge in the Buddha as an example, we realize that we don't need any external deity. We realize that we have Buddha nature within us and fundamental excellence. Taking refuge in the Dharma, we realize we don't need to listen to any doctrines taught in the name of ego clinging, ego fixation, ego improvement. Rather, all the Buddhist doctrines are really anti-ego. Taking refuge in the Sangha, we realize that the companionship of brothers and sisters in the Dharma, sitting and practicing together, is the best companionship. It's so dear. We really open ourselves to each other and have affection for each other. He says, we do not need to look for better friends. So true. In taking refuge and becoming known as a refugee, we're liberating ourselves independently on our own. Because we have humbleness and an absence of pride, we begin to experience delight in what we have done. Because of the commitment we've made, our awareness begins to expand. We've discovered something worthy of taking refuge in, worthy of bowing to, worthy of committing to. We bow to our ancestors, who include anyone who has transmitted sanity to us. We're talking about the lineage here, whatever the lineage and tradition. And I can think of other people outside the Buddhist world who fit this description in my life and whom I hold dear. This is what it means to discover the dwelling place of the ancestors. And with that, I'll turn this over to Barry.
All right, I think that did it. Okay. So, this next section, taking refuge in the three jewels, is really getting into what you're getting into if you decide to take the refuge vow. It is, what does it really mean to take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, in the Sangha? And just now, John was speaking in relation to the non-theistic nature of the path, about how you are not required to commit yourself to any sort of belief or to eschew any other belief. But taking refuge vow, there's something that's a little similar actually, because in taking the refuge vow, it is an act of changing your allegiance. That, up until now, you've had whatever experience you've had, and you wouldn't even be considering the refuge vow if you weren't finding some real truth in these teachings. But by taking the refuge vow, you've begun to see that so much of your life is spent in this repetitive, joyless, anxious, mindless thoughts and dreams. And you begin to start to recognize all of that. You can taste it, this samsara. And you begin to recognize that this is a view. And through meditation and practice, you begin to get little glimpses of something outside of that, of cracks in that view, of having, even if they're small, experiences where things are fresh, clear, and vivid. And so that is something that can bring you to be prepared to renounce that world of samsara, the samsaric view, and commit yourself to become a dharmic person. He says in the reading, you are renouncing the samsaric ugliness that surrounds us and the pain that goes with it. Through samsaric Samantha, through shamatha. Okay, let's do that again. Through shamatha discipline, you've had a glimpse of how ordinary Buddha-like person can achieve a perfect life. Right? Remember the legend of the Buddha. He was a guy, and as John just said, he was a very ordinary person who, on his own, achieved enlightenment. And so there's the possibility. I'm a person just like the Buddha. Why not? So, and he goes on to say that you begin to realize things could be orderly, peaceful, and right on the dot. And at the same time, you see how sloppy and confused the world is. Right on the dot. This is a phrase that is used especially in Shambhala teachings, but it just means that you're not off in the past and future of your thoughts and everything. You're right here, like on the dot, present. And at the same time, you see how sloppy and confused the world is. So, therefore, he says, you take refuge. You vow to yourself you will never give in to that sloppiness. You vow that you will maintain the purity and exactness of the shamatha vipassana experience so that eventually you can relay what you have experienced to the rest of the world. That is the logic of the refuge vow. John mentioned this also, that, the Buddha Dharma is transmitted by people who are exhibiting or transmitting what they have experienced. That none of these teachings make much sense unless there is that kind of experience with it. And so, therefore, the refuge vow is not only to benefit yourself, but of course, the more of a decent human being you become, the more benefit it is to whoever you come into contact with. So the vow is a commitment to take it all wholeheartedly, you might say. In ordinary language, taking refuge means seeking shelter, but in this case, it means something slightly different. And as John said, this is not trying to escape from anything, it's actually kind of the opposite. That it means that you're going to become stateless as a refugee. You are leaving behind a lot of the familiarity of the routines and the ways you've always responded to things and think about things. So this is a real renunciation. So it is a chance to set your life on a new course, to set out as the Buddha did, leaving behind all the comfort seeking and the familiar, well-traveled patterns of the samsaric life, to set out on a new path. Taking refuge actually requires some moxie, you might say. Chogyam Trungpa puts it in rather stark terms. He says, to take refuge requires strength and willingness. It means you must give up your individual preoccupations and obsessions, the personal favoritisms that maintain your existence. So that's not always easy. So taking the vow can help you to develop the confidence to leave much of what you've held dear behind and become stateless. I will tell, let me see how we're doing on time, briefly, when Lama Chodon came to the Westchester Buddhist Center to give refuge vows, and he interviewed each of us beforehand. I was one of the potential refugees. And one of the things he said to me is, you must surrender your past. And it took a minute, but when that started to sink in and I started to actually think about just sort of letting go, I realized I felt a kind of a panic. I could feel the bottom dropping out from under me because my path, it's all these stories of what I've done and what that says about who I am, right? To surrender your past. And that really is part of becoming a refugee. It's actually similar for real refugees, like in the physical world, too. So, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha is also taking refuge in the body, speech, and mind. He says taking refuge is very direct and simple. You take refuge in the Buddha as example, the Dharma as journey or path, and the Sangha as companionship. And taking refuge with the mind, you contemplate and identify with the Buddha. Right? This is mind. That when you take refuge in the Buddha, he says your mind is concentrated on and given over to the bravery of the Buddha. And actually, what you're doing is trying to emulate the Buddha in all of his attributes. Here he mentions the bravery of the Buddha. Well, you have to be brave, right? To set out on a path like this. Dharma is related to speech and mental, the intellect, contemplation. He says when you take refuge in the Dharma as path, your speech, the intellectual, logical, reasoning mind of the modern world, or even the whole world, is none other than the Dharmic rational mind. It means that it permeates everything in your consciousness. And when you take refuge in the Sangha's companionship, your body is included, because in accepting fellowship in the Sangha, you are committed to the behavior patterns of the Sangha. And this has to do with, well, as John was saying, cleaning up after yourself and becoming a decent person. He then speaks about, when you take refuge, there's definitely has to be a connection with the preceptor, which is simply the person who you have an interview with, and then conducts the ceremony. I don't think much needs to be said about that. So now, taking refuge in the Buddha. That we take refuge in the Buddha as example. The Buddha alone realized that neither spiritual trappings or materialistic worldly trappings are ultimate salvation. And having realized that, he abandoned all of it. In the same way that you can work on yourself by practicing shamatha and vipassana. So this is the Buddha as example. You might say that as ordinary human beings, we are not as well favored as the Buddha, so we might have difficulty with such direct liberation and practice. Well, yeah. But we are all free and well favored, as it says in the chant. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. That we do have, that our life experience and attributes and our karma has all led us to a place where we can do this. We have the ability to practice and to follow the path, and that's good enough. He says, because of his teachings, his wisdom, and his infinite kindness to all of us, we can develop ourselves, we can mimic him, and we can become like him. So, and he says, the Buddha is an example of someone who has achieved what should be achieved and refrained from what should have been avoided, refrained from what should be avoided. He is an example of a perfectly disciplined person. And now, being perfectly disciplined is not anything that I don't think any of us we can do. But the point is that in taking refuge in the Buddha, and there's an aspiration to become like the Buddha. And to the greater extent you can do that, that takes you along the path to enlightenment. He says, we are capable of becoming pure and absolutely awake. This may not last for more than a minute, but we are still trying. So it's to that point. Okay. Oh, and he mentions one thing here. He says, we are capable of conquering, attaining, and going beyond. We are capable of becoming pure and absolutely awake, he says. Going beyond, by the way, is an, what do you call it? It means becoming enlightened, being absolutely beyond any lingering grasping of, the kinds of ambitions and concerns and things that take us into samsara. That's all. So he says, we are competing with him. We are trying to attain Buddhahood and to understand that state of mind, which is very open, fantastic, and utterly powerful. With that state of mind, we could be gone beyond and beyond, but still keep up with our daily life, still cook our little pot of tea. You see, this is not about achieving some state where we're kind of hovering over everything and taking refuge in the Dharma. So, secondly, we take refuge in the Dharma as path. And he says, taking refuge in the Dharma allows you to understand and trust the true Dharma, the expression of one's life. A couple of interesting things here. The true Dharma is the Sadharma, which was covered in quite a bit of detail back in chapter 4, I think, a while ago. But there are a lot of different kinds of Dharma. Dharma can mean many things, but Sadharma means the Buddha Dharma. So it allows you to understand and trust. So taking refuge allows you to understand and trust the true Dharma. That by committing yourself to the Dharma, it frees us from many of the obstacles to understanding. Truly understanding the Dharma is very difficult when there is confusion from doubt in their value of the teachings, or still like window shopping, as they say. So refuge in the Dharma is taken when real confidence in the value and wisdom of the teachings has developed, and then taking the refuge vow settles the mind, you might say. You can then approach the teachings with more openness, curiosity, even excitement. The Dharma is known as passionless, he says. Well, so what's this excitement I just talked about? Passionlessness here doesn't mean lacking feelings. It's referring to one of the three poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance. Passion, he says, is based on struggle, aggression, and longing. It is based on hunger and thirst, on poverty mentality. We wish we could do better. We wish we could get something greater. So this is the passion that is not there. That the Dharma subdues passion. Just a moment here. There was something I wanted to. Okay. So, taking refuge in the Dharma means giving up your individual intellectual and metaphysical speculation. In terms of your shamatha practice, such occupations are problematic, so you should give them up. By taking refuge in the Dharma, you are giving up your intellectual stronghold. And this reminds me of this. One of my favorite images is how we kind of all live in this castle in the air, of our ego, and this stronghold that we all of these stories that come up, the narratives and the things we keep going back to and replaying and thinking about. It's all about like patching up this stronghold, this castle, so that we can feel, so that our ego can feel safe in there. Okay. I think that's that part. And taking refuge in the Sangha. How are we doing on time? Okay. We take refuge in the Sangha for companionship. He says it means, the Sangha means those who have entered the path. And he then goes on to talk about traditionally the meaning of Sangha, in the monastic setting, and I'm not going to bother with that too much. I guess the point here is that as there are many different kinds of Dharma, Dharma can mean a lot of different things. Well, there are different kinds of Sanghas. But the Sangha here that we're taking refuge in is the noble Sangha. And that is the Sangha that is engaged in the practice of, you might say, the noble Dharma, the Sadharma. So we should approach the Sangha as a continuation of our understanding of the Buddha and Dharma. Buddha is the teacher, Dharma is the teaching, Sangha is the practitioners. Yes, here it is. You take refuge in the Sangha as a community of practitioners who stand on their own 2 feet. Since nobody is leaning on you, if you fall down, only you will fall down. And this is an important aspect of it, that this is that each of us has our own experience, our own path to follow, and each of us has to find our own way. We find our own way in the company of our brothers and sisters of the Sangha, and with the teachings of the Buddha, in the Dharma, the Buddha's example, the teachings of the Buddha. But each of us really is finding our own way. So there's not that kind of dependency on, like, oh my gosh, if Joe messes up, then I'm doomed. No. However, of course, we're all here to support each other in whatever ways we can. So, although there is a mutual journey taking place, you are not dependent on the group. The comradeship of the Sangha is based on individual dignity. Taking refuge in the Sangha allows for an appreciation of sane companionship, sane community interaction. In other words, not neurotic. And then here is where he goes on to speak of many different kinds of sanghas in terms of just groups of people. It says, yeah, I'm going to skip that. Okay. The noble Sangha is free of theism. And being free from theistic conceptual mind, they are able to rest their minds in the Saddharma, or perfect Dharma. And the Saddharma is not regarded as precious, but as sharp and real, perfect and definite, steady and solid. I guess as we're saying, in other words, this is not something that is, we have great respect for the Saddharma, but it's not worshipped. And then I'm just looking at, I think I want to skip over a couple of things here. Now he talks about elegance. Fundamentally, the idea of refuge is to reshape individuals into a noble Sangha so they could understand the true Dharma. the goodness or decency of the Sangha is based on learning how to behave, how to talk, how to handle oneself. And we are connected with a kind of dharmic elegance. And I just love that word and what it evokes there. This is not elegance in any kind of ego-based way, but it just means a kind of precision and dignity and living a mindful life, being really present on the dot, as he said. And finally, so when you take refuge in the three jewels, you become a part of the noble Sangha, not because you have an audience, not because you're trying to impress anybody, not because of what you are. And what you are is brilliance and richness. That is the basic point of taking the refuge vow. And I guess I would just like to say that I could sum this up, I think, by saying that the basic point is to become a dharmic person, a decent human being. So by taking the vow, you are relieving yourself of the distractions and window shopping. Then you can begin to understand the true Dharma, to really take in the teachings, and become diligent and disciplined, inspired by the example of the Buddha. And all of these gears start meshing in you. You begin to become a decent human being. And as you fully join the Noble Sangha, new possibilities open for you. So now we could have some questions. And answers, hopefully, or comments, or criticisms.
I'll comment. I have said the refuge vows many times and practiced for a while. And I have to say, I really appreciate going through this material again, hear it anew. So what stands out for me, and this is something that the way that John frames it sometime also, is shifting the allegiance. And I liked hearing that again. I thought it was really helpful. But of course, taking refuge is many different things. And I think that's what, Barry, you're saying. It's all these different things, but among that is shifting an allegiance. So it's helpful. Thank you.
Shifting allegiance to what?
The Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. Is that a best question?
Right. Right. Thank you. That's good.
Is there anyone here who has not taken the vow, who has an interest in doing it, and haven't been keeping track myself? And you can always take it again. Well, actually, we chant it every morning, but
Will you help me remember what we mean by mind? Do we mean consciousness?
In what context are we talking? Where was it? Because mind means many things. in Buddhism. And primarily there's a big distinction between confused mind and enlightened mind.
Right.
Yeah, in for instance, in Zen mind, beginner's mind, I always liked it. That's Suzuki Roshi, in that book. Well, in Zen altogether, what am I talking about? The distinction is Soto Zen between big mind and little mind. And big mind is the mind of sanity. It's here, it's everywhere. It's what allows us to see the walls and hear the words and feel the seat underneath us and taste the coffee or whatever it may be. It's just omnipresent. Little mind is thinking mind. It says, I like this, I don't like that, I plan the other, I avoid this other. And little mind is thinking mind full of thoughts and concepts. Those are the two main fundamental distinctions. But then within those, there are other subtle distinctions yet subtler that are made.
I was thinking last night about just being sort of the sensory receptor, and how that's part of consciousness. And then, I mean, I don't even know what I'm saying, but because I'm thinking a lot about, but yeah, and then just not contriving things, but I still was, I mean, it sounds like mind is something to keep thinking about, and consciousness. It's just going to get all the layers of it.
In the Tibetan tradition, they make the distinction that I've been talking about, big mind, little mind. They would call the big mind yeshe, primordial knowing. It's always here. It's primordial because it's beginningless. And it's always been here and always will be. Yeah means primordial, she means to know. And then, as opposed to that, there's chitta, which is the little thinking mind that has thoughts and that thinks about I and other. And what you're describing, I think, the sensory awareness, falls into the first category. Yeshe. It includes everything.
Thank you. Thanks.
It's always here. It's effortless. We rest in it.
And that's what our mind does. Our little mind, it starts contriving.
It
We
does.
have to get rid of all the contrivance.
But every once in a while, our little mind jumps into the ocean of the big mind. We connect to it. It goes, oh, yeah, here it is. And the little mind just dissolves and leaves nothing but big mind, which was always there. So the analogy, there are many analogies for it. One is like the sky. Big mind is the sky, and little mind are the clouds or the birds that go across the sky. Terry, you wanted to say something? No. Judy. And then Vicky.
Yes, in the chant it says, which I sometimes find confusing, is whatever mind desires. That's surely referring to larger mind, to primordial.
I forgot the context. Can you remind me? I've forgotten the context.
In the chant, it says
in the dedicating the offering.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it
Never
says
mind it.
whatever mind desires.
Yeah, I find that a little confusing too. How does it start? Somebody's devotions of Samayavan accept this offering gift of Dharma. May yogins with our disciples obtain lordship, freedom of disease, long life, glory, fame, good fortune. We're asking for glory and fame and good fortune.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. How sensoric is that?
Yeah, what's up with that?
Yeah,
That's
And all
accomplished.
great and vast enjoyments grant us the cities of the pacifying and enriching actions.
yeah,
On Samaya, holders guard us, support us with all the cities. May there be no untimely death, illness. Well, I think that what it's really, that chant is the way I take it, is that we're asking for the proper environment that would allow us to practice. In order to practice, you have to have livelihood. You have to have food. You have to have a shelter.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's really what's being asked for there.
But
Although,
glory, fame, hey, man.
yeah, I know. I'll take them if they come.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's going to say no,
Right.
but it is confusing.
Yeah.
And grant whatever mind
Mind.
desires,
Accomplish whatever mind desires.
accomplish whatever mind desires.
Maybe we could think of that in terms of big mind, that
I'm
big
trying.
mind, what it desires ultimately is the enlightenment and peace of the world. Nirvana. If you could say that it even desires anything.
Yeah, yeah. I'm always puzzling over that.
What do you think, Rain? Do you have any ideas?
Are you asking me?
I was asking Rain.
You asked me something?
Yeah. Do you have any ideas about this chant? Accomplish whatever mind desires. Glory, fame, good fortune, and all great and vast enjoyments.
Mm-hmm.
Grant us the cities, the powers, the enriching actions, and so on.
Yeah, it said, oops.
There it is.
It says it correctly. Accomplish whatever mind desires. So you have to be sure for yourself that you do not take this as my mind. That's wrong.
My mind, yeah.
Yeah. Don't even get close to that. What mind desires. So then you're wide open for all the possibilities that might evolve. And then follow your own road, your own way, accomplishing that what is.
Yeah, I think it's basically. Yeah.
I come from a different perspective because I've been practicing Zen for the last 40 years. And I don't fumble with words anymore and concepts. I struggled with that long time ago, but then I sat and sat and sat some more for about 20, 30 years, and it just quiets down slowly.
Yeah.
Great.
So then it's important not to use my mind because then you're lost already.
You mean general mind, kind of primordial consciousness.
Mind is, let's say, a combination of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha together. You can see that as mind. And it expresses itself. And you can take it as Dharma, you can take it as Sangha, or you can take it as Buddha. Those options are always available. And you don't have to have an opinion at that moment. There is no me that brings in an opinion. Because then you're lost. Then it becomes my mind, my way, my Dharma, my Sangha.
Thank you.
Oh, Sarah.
One way I always looked at that chant is if we're coming from like an enlightened place, then accomplishing all of those things would actually spread the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then that would be a really good thing.
That's helpful. Yeah.
Vicky.
Yeah, Barry, you were speaking about leaving our past behind, our lives behind, And you mentioned that you started to experience kind of like a panic, bottom coming out. I'd like to hear more about that experience because that that's something that haunts me a little bit. It's kind of like if all your bearings are gone, how do you not think you're crazy? I don't know. Just I was wondering how you experienced that, how you handled that.
I I I now think of that as a kind of pointing out in a way, as a very very important for me. The interesting thing, by the way, I related this to a couple of other people, and it had a completely different meaning to them. It's like, oh yeah, sure, okay, it's interesting, but for whatever reason, um, when he said that to me, I started to do it. I started to just, and what came up for me is I started getting flashes of all these things that are kind of like important milestones, like this relationship I had, or this, adventure I took, or, things like that. And as I realized that I would have to let go of them, I felt this kind of panic. Well, but wait a second, without that, who am I?
Who am I? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And that, he, I don't know what he intended, but what he accomplished with me is he led me right to that point. What is this I, this me, you know? And with the stories, without the stories, I just had, it felt like the bottom dropping out, because like there was, there was no me.
You can say when that happens to you, Barry, then you're ready to die.
Well, I think it's ego death.
Yeah, it is a death.
So, but I got used to it after a while.
Wow. Can you elaborate on that? 30 or 40 years and then you got used to it.
Well, it's like Rian said, well, you just meditate for another 20 years. And no, I mean, okay, I'm a little reluctant to go into that kind of stuff too much, because the fact is, each of us has our own experience, our own path. It just happened that I was in a place where that was the meaning it had. I think someone else sitting there might have had a very different experience. If this had happened the next day, I might have had a very different experience. So, I always question when I to talk about too much about my own experience, of how helpful that may be, really, because we all find our own way. There are things like that can happen for each of us. There can be moments, there can be a teaching, there can be an experience. Something happens that, it's like it illuminates a possibility. It's like it's saying, wow, look at that.
I'm wondering if the fear part of it is ego getting very panicky and doing what ego does, which is getting louder with an emotion like that, an aversion emotion. And I mean, I would think it would be overwhelming to have it happen all at once. I was wondering if it can be done sort of on a gradual, absorbable basis to avoid having a complete PTSD attack.
There you go. Yeah, no, they say that some people, like John's talked about, like instant realizers, that something happens and boom, they're enlightened, and. But I think for most people, we evolve slowly. I mean, after all, before we encountered this path, we had a whole lifetime behind us, of developing this ego, but this personality, this idea of this view, of this is who I am, this is what the world's about, this is my place in it, these are my relationships with these things and these people. It's this whole elaborate thing that we construct as we go through life. And along comes Buddhism, and it's questioning all of that. And so it could be a real shock if a big piece of that is just yanked out from under you, which is kind of what happened for me. Many people never experience anything like that. They have a more gradual development. Not saying that we don't end up in the same place. I don't know.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about all the things that I hold on to buttress my life, to make my life conform to my description of what a life should be, and how holding on to those things is both difficult and unhappy. And I was thinking of Mingyur Rinpoche just taking off and wandering,
Mm.
sort of wondering what that would feel like. I mean, there are a lot of people doing it. They're all the homeless people on the street. Although
Mm.
I think probably the vast majority are very unhappy people.
Yeah.
I just a while ago was thinking about an old friend of mine or acquaintance, Paul Salopek. Have you heard of him?
Paul who?
Salopek. There's a PBS documentary about him, and I'll share the link. But he's traveling around the world on foot. It's called Out of Eden, and he's been doing it for many years now. And he's gone to, I think he's been to Tibet and everywhere, but he's really doing this. So he won the Pulitzer. He's a journalist a while back, and it's fascinating. But when you said traveling, that's what he's doing now, all of his life.
Wow.
Just traveling.
Yeah, that maybe.
Oh, Miriam.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to, I think what we're talking about is about really relinquishing all our preconceptions about what our life should be, what it's been. And I find that, our past does keep us stuck in a narrative. It's what we use to explain why we're miserable and why are we in these circumstances and what's happened to me, and or how things should have been or should be. So to relinquish your past is a fresh start if you can do it. I think it's just very hard though to undo these habits and patterns of the mind, and even to treat thoughts as just thoughts. I still take mine seriously, like it's insidious. But I just wanted to mention something as well around taking refuge in the Dharma means giving up your individual, intellectual, and metaphysical speculation. And I've been really guilty of that recently, although my intellectual pursuits have taken me to a place which is a confirmation of Yeshe, believe it or not, from philosophical circles, from physics and physicists, cognitive scientists, I don't know, but everyone seems to be converging on this idea of, and they call it different things. One person calls it the cosmic consciousness, which is just one. And, you know, it sounds so much like what we started studying in the Vajradhara. And even physicists are saying time and space is doomed. Like there is really, our thoughts are just adaptations, they're not real. And I'm hearing it from different places, and somehow I think it must be helping me switch allegiances. Maybe it's the little nudge that, you know, people who are not Buddhists are coming to a similar conclusion. So I don't know, but I thought, and I asked myself as well, am I just taking a detour here through these concepts and avoiding the real task of dropping into an awakened state, just dropping into that place of no concepts and just pure awareness? And I don't know if I'm procrastinating or if I'm becoming more and more in my own research convinced that it's true. I don't know. But I do think that it's probably right on this idea of not needing any metaphysical proof at some point.
Really? Yes, well said.
Yep.
I think of that thing that people put in their emails, quoting Trungpa Rinpoche, we're falling through centerless space. The bad news is we're falling through centerless space. The good news is there is no ground.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you know, Miriam, I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, contemplating some of that stuff. But you know, what you said right there at the end, though, is is the point. You know, I mean, some of us, you know, our approach tends to be intellectual because that's our nature. Others are more operate out of, you know, kinesthetic or, you know, emotional approach or just a intuitive approach. But that's all okay.
I think I'm just scared. I think that's just it. I to abandon my past and familiar way of understanding my life and who I am. And it's interesting that I'm more scared now than I was 2 years ago when I first joined. And I'm wondering if it's because it's becoming real, you know?
Maybe. But you know, it's not really like you make a choice to turn away from all of that. I mean, you know, the path is more it's just as you continue to do it, you practice, you contemplate, you hear the teachings, you study, you contemplate, you meditate, and you just keep doing that. And as you do, then you just don't take all those things quite as seriously anymore. You begin to it just starts to become evident how you just know that those are just stories. And, you know, sometimes the feelings can be very strong, but at the same time, you know that this is just your mind, you know, delivering up some piece of something or another. And if you leave it alone, it'll pass.
Yeah, I think the experience is of calmness when the more and more you progress.
Friends, we're getting near the end here.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
Sarah, I think Sarah had something before we.
Okay, Sarah, great.
Thank you. My Buddha Dharma fever used to be on fire, and right now I'm experiencing like barely a flicker. I was actually almost falling asleep in class tonight, which never would have happened to me before. I'm just wondering, you experienced people, if there's any tips or tricks to get through this. I'm guessing it's because I'm taking refuge in things other than the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha right now.
No.
Mm.
First of all, be kind to yourself. You know, that happens. Stuff happens.
It's a little scary. I don't want to let it go. I want it back, you know.
Yeah. Just keep practicing to the extent you can and relax.
You're very dear to us.
Mm.
You should know that.
Mm.
Thank you.
It's really true.
And there is nothing wrong with a nice scoop of ice cream.
Really?
Really.
Well said,
I
Ray.
can eat a lot of ice cream.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to mute everyone and if I can and okay, hold on a second. Here's it. Okay, here we go. Oh yeah, you've got to do the share screen. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all of the maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may it free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Ringdom's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.